Really wants to express his opinion or his idea about something that I've said. And so I don't think he's meaning it in a way that he wants to run over what I just said, but he wants to add to it or maybe help me feel better about it.
I go and answer questions even before I get the question, and I just don't take the time.
Something is shifting in a very significant way in this entire Duggar story, and it is happening right now in real time. More people are speaking up. More people are coming forward. More people are calling out what has been happening in this world for years, and the reason this moment feels different from every other moment in this family's long history of scandal is because what Joseph Duggar did cannot be explained away. It cannot be called curiosity. It cannot be framed as a young man who did not know better. Because Joseph Duggar is a 25 or 26-year-old man who allegedly abused a 9-year-old child not once but repeatedly over the course of a week, or possibly 2 weeks, while they were on vacation together. And that pattern of sustained, deliberate predatory behavior is something that no amount of IBLP counseling or family loyalty or Jim Bob Duggar spin can make disappear. And the people who have been silent for years are looking at this moment and deciding that enough is enough. Now let me tell you what has been happening to the Caldwell family this week, because it is one of the most disturbing illustrations of Jim Bob Duggar's vindictiveness and retaliatory nature that we have seen yet in this entire story. After Paul and Christina Caldwell went to police and reported what Joseph did to their daughter, after they did the right thing and cooperated with law enforcement, Jim Bob Duggar has been systematically attempting to destroy their lives in every way available to him. And the list of what has been done to this family is genuinely shocking. The power to their home was cut off, the water to their home was cut off, this with 8 children living in that house. They were being threatened with eviction and told to get out with 30 days' notice. Their house was broken into, and they had to change the locks on their own doors. Jed Duggar was publicly snarky and cruel toward them, and then on Friday, after all of that, someone called DCFS on the Caldwell family and reported them for child abuse, specifically alleging excessive exercise as a form of discipline. And I want you to think about the absolute audacity of that. The Duggar family, who are currently facing active criminal investigations for child endangerment and false imprisonment of their own children, who had a home that neighbors describe as filthy and smelling of serious neglect, called Child Protective Services on the family of the 9-year-old victim, as an act of retaliation. And DCFS showed up at the Caldwell home while Amy Paul was there helping them pack, and investigators spoke to the children and were not there for very long before determining that the report was retaliatory in nature. And the reason we know it was retaliatory is that Washington County DCFS had already cleared the Caldwell children. They had already been interviewed, they had already been assessed, they had already been given the all clear, because when Paul reported what Joseph did in Washington County, investigators were required to interview all children connected to the situation, and the Caldwell kids went through that process, cooperated fully, and were cleared. So when Benton County received this new report, it was immediately obvious to the investigators who showed up that this was not a genuine child welfare concern, but a calculated act of harassment against a family that had the courage to go to the police. And Amy Paul addressed all of this publicly in a post that I want to share with you, because it is direct and it is powerful, and it says everything that needs to be said. Amy wrote that the reason she drove 14 hours to help the Caldwells is simple. There was a need, and as Christians we are called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And she expressed being appalled at the complete lack of Christian charity being shown to this family that is in crisis, pointing out that not only were the Caldwells put in the awful situation of having to turn their son-in-law into police because he was not man enough to take accountability himself, but that he is also kicking them out of their house and giving them 30 days to get out with the power and water cut off, and 8 kids living in the home. And Amy made a point that I think deserves to be said loudly and clearly. Not one Duggar is reaching out to the Caldwells. Not one Duggar is helping them move or asking how they can help. And the Caldwells share 4 grandchildren with Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, 4 children who are the grandchildren of both families. And the Duggars are doing nothing to support them. And Amy called on Jim Bob directly to do the right thing, to help his extended family from the abuse and trauma his son has caused, to encourage Kendra to divorce Joseph, to focus on the children, to give Kendra half the money in real estate, and most pointedly, to not make Kendra another Anna. a reference to Josh Duggar's wife Anna, who has remained married to a convicted child predator and is financially dependent on Jim Bob while her children grow up with a father in federal prison. And Amy's warning is not just a suggestion, it is a prediction of exactly what will happen to Kendra if she stays on the path she is currently on. Now let me talk about what is actually happening inside the Caldwell home situation and why the GoFundMe that was set up for them is so important. They have a goal of getting out by May 1st, and they are working toward that with the money that has been raised. And I want to be clear about the timeline of what Jim Bob has done to this family, because sources tell me that Jim Bob Duggar's campaign against Paul Caldwell did not start with Joseph's arrest. It started in 2020. And someone told me directly that Jim Bob's goal since 2020 has been to completely destroy Paul Caldwell, and that he will not stop until Paul is destroyed. And the reasons for this vendetta go back years. Paul stood up to Jim Bob and told him that Jason Duggar could not marry his daughter Lauren. Paul stood up to Jim Bob about how he handled the Josh Duggar situation within their shared church community and refused to go along with Jim Bob's approach. And then Paul proved that he had the willingness and the courage to actually go to law enforcement when a crime was committed, which is the one thing Jim Bob has spent his entire life trying to prevent anyone in his orbit from doing. And so Jim Bob's response to all of that has been a 6-year campaign of harassment, intimidation, financial pressure, and retaliation, designed to take everything Paul has, his business, his house, his kids, his daughter, his reputation. And the fact that this retaliation is still ongoing even now, even while Joseph sits in a Florida jail and the entire country is watching, tells you that Jim Bob Duggar has absolutely no intention of stopping and no fear of consequences. Now I need to talk about what sources are saying about the condition of Joseph and Kendra's home, because this is something that has not been fully reported, and it is deeply important to understanding the full picture of what those 4 children were living in. Neighbors and people who know the family have described the house as filthy, as smelling of serious neglect, as an environment where the children were not being properly fed, not being educated, not being supervised, and were being locked in rooms. And multiple people who know the situation have said that the neglect was not minor or situational, but serious and sustained, and that both Joseph and Kendra were essentially checked out as parents. That Kendra was checked out as a mother, and that the children were not thriving in any meaningful sense of the word. And this matters enormously for the legal situation that Kendra is currently in, because prosecutors have the ability to offer Kendra a deal if they believe she is the non-offending parent who was being controlled and manipulated by Joseph. They can approach her and say, "Cooperate with us. Tell us what you know. Separate from Joseph. Comply with DCFS, and we will drop the charges against you." But Kendra is currently doing none of those things. She is not separating from Joseph. She is not complying with DCFS. She is not making any of the moves that would signal to prosecutors that she is a mother who wants her children back and is willing to do the work to get them. And every day that passes where she continues to orbit Joseph and the Duggar family makes it harder and harder for any prosecutor to justify offering her that lifeline. And there is something even more difficult and more disturbing that sources have shared, and I want to address it directly because I think it needs to be said. Every single person who knows Joseph and knows what was happening in that home has said they have no reason to believe that his children were spared from what he was doing, that the brazenness with which he allegedly abused his sister-in-law, who is a minor in a family vacation setting with other people around, suggests a level of entitlement and lack of fear of consequences that would not have been contained only to that one situation. And the children who were living in that home under those conditions of neglect and control deserve to have that possibility taken seriously by investigators and by the therapy process that hopefully they are now beginning to access. Now on the legal question of what Kendra's options actually are in terms of her marriage. Arkansas is a community property state with equitable distribution of marital assets, meaning that marital property is divided fairly, though not necessarily 50-50. And there are multiple grounds on which Kendra could file for divorce right now without waiting, including fault-based grounds that cover cruel treatment, general indignities, lack of support, and if Joseph is ultimately convicted of a felony, that is itself a ground for divorce. Under Arkansas law, And while they have a covenant marriage, which does require citing specific grounds, Kendra absolutely has those grounds available to her right now. And the moment she files for divorce, she is no longer bound to stay silent. She is no longer a co-defendant in the same legal position as Joseph. She becomes a witness who can testify. A mother who can demonstrate to the court that she is choosing her children over her husband, and she potentially becomes someone that prosecutors want to work with, rather than prosecute. But the Duggars will never encourage her to do that, because a divorced Kendra is a Kendra who is out from under their control, a Kendra who can talk, a Kendra who knows what Joseph told her before they got married about things he had done, and a Kendra who could potentially expose information that implicates Jim Bob himself in knowing about conduct that he failed to report. And that is the real reason Jim Bob is working so hard to keep Kendra inside the family system and financially dependent on him. Because Kendra Duggar knows things, and Jim Bob cannot afford for her to have an independent lawyer, an independent voice, or an independent life. The GoFundMe for the Caldwell family is still active and still important, and I want to encourage anyone who has the ability to contribute to do so, because this family turned in a predator, cooperated with law enforcement, did everything that we say victims and their families should do, and as a direct result, they have had their power cut off, their water cut off, their house broken into, DCFS called on them retaliatorily, and they're being evicted from their home. And they need to be out by May 1st, and every dollar raised helps make that possible, and helps show this family that the world outside the Duggar bubble sees them, believes them, and stands with them. And I want to close with this. The information that is coming in right now is coming from more sources than ever before. It is coming from neighbors, from people on the outer circle of the Duggar world, from people who thought they were still friends with the Duggars, but are no longer okay with what they are seeing. And the Duggars think they know who is talking, but they genuinely have no idea how many people are speaking up right now. And the reason they cannot contain this the way they have contained every other scandal is because this time the Caldwells did not let them handle it in-house. This time the father went directly to law enforcement. This time there is a recorded confession. This time there are criminal charges in 2 states. And this time, there are enough people on the outside of the Duggar system who are done being quiet. Jim Bob Duggar has built his empire on silence, and that empire is cracking. And the bravest people in this story, Paul Caldwell, Christina Caldwell, Amy Paul, and every single person who has picked up the phone to share what they know, are the reason it is cracking, and the only question now is whether enough people will continue to speak up to finally bring the full weight of accountability down on everyone in this family who has earned it.